Good morning. Good to see all of you here. This is the NCDOT Roadway Technician Certification class. That's not why you're here. You're probably in the wrong place. But my name is Jim Grady, back in the faculty, Wayne Rogerson and Bob Dowdy. You know Bob, Wayne, and myself have been retired from DOT for a number of years, but we're helping with these training classes along with a number of other things on a part-time basis. So we'll be your instructors, for the class today and tomorrow. Again, just in case you don't know, Wiley Jones is the pavement construction engineer for DOT now. Wiley's been in that job now for about 3 years, I guess it is. I don't think he'll be here today. I just talked with him earlier and he said he was planning to be here today. But he is the pavement construction engineer. We have, just to bring you up today, we have 3 area people that deal with asphalt in the pavement section now. Well, we did have 3. One of them just recently designed and has not been, a replacement has not been named. That's Mike McCullough down in the eastern part of the state. So in the central part of the state, we still have Kevin Naylor. And then in the western part of the state, we have Dan Hunter. Also in the back is Richard Burley. Richard is our official photographer for the day or whatever. But Richard's normal job is to work with concrete pavements in similar fashion to what those other guys work in asphalt pavements. We do have a roster and a sign-in sheet. Have a sign-in sheet here, looks something like this. Make sure you get your name on it legibly so that you can read it. Place there in the second blank for your last 4 digits of your social security number. That's all we want, just the last 4 digits. And then if you're with DOT, put the division you work in, maybe your immediate supervisor, whoever. If you're not with DOT, put your company name, affiliation, whatever the case might be. I'll go through the roster here and call your names. Just answer if you're here. With Atlantic Coast Engineering and Testing, Barry Hines. Blythe Brothers, Joseph Pritchard. Here. Also Blythe Ray Hall. Here. This is Blythe Construction. With Carl Rose and Sons. Wendy Bongeron. Wendy here. With the City of Charlotte, John Anderson. Also with the City of Charlotte, Don Kincaid. Here. Also with Charlottesville, Lapina. Here. And Casablanca, Missouri. Thank you. With ECS Carolina, James Cloninger. Also with ECS, Jeffrey Hudson. And Jason Bath. Jason not here. EST. And that's what it says on here. I just misread. The Geoscience Group Incorporated, Silas Driftwood. Silas not here. Hillcrest Construction, Curtis Moore. And also William Reese. James Parker Asphalt Company, James Parker Jr.
Here.
On spec testing, Timothy Glass.
Here.
Also on spec testing, Jody Overcast. Pretty good. Great contract in Richard Dollar.
Here.
RK&K, Glenn Messick.
Here.
Sloan Construction, Tyson Hope. And also the Sloan is Darrell Kenny. Is Donald Rogers and Christopher Stott here? Donald Rogers, Christopher Stott. The 7 Engineering Consulting Services, Ford Parker. These next people are DOT people, Division 6, Daniel Bryan.
Here.
Division 6, Stephen Noble.
Here.
Division 7, Elvin Jackson. Also Division 7, Charlie Leonard.
Here.
Division 7, Samuel Whittington.
Here.
Division 9, Andrew Baker.
Here.
And next several, Division 9, Lee Ely.
Here.
Michael Mallett.
Here.
Joshua Miller.
Here.
Azak Tucker. DOT Division 10, Marshall Carter.
Here.
Also Division 10, Michael Jordan.
Here.
Division 11, Dale Brown.
Here.
Also Division 11, Darius Callaghan.
Here.
Shields Clark.
Here.
Jason Faulkner.
Here.
Milton Gibson.
Here.
Mark Gilbert.
Here.
Michael Motley. Joel Rogers. Stephen Surratt. DOT Division 12, David Chapman.
Here.
Matt Elliott. Matt not here. Also Division 12, Marty Powell. DOT Division 14, Nicholas Adams.
Here.
Charlie Cable.
Here.
Jesse J.J. Myers with him at 2. Also with CMI, Richard Coley. Excuse me, Ronald Coley. Anyone whose name I didn't call. Y'all need to go back here and talk to Wayne.
What's his name?
What is your name?
Robert Donald with Summit. You skipped him.
And your name?
Ken Horn,
Thomas
Lewis, Thomas Lewis,
Who you with?
Thomas Lewis, Falcon engineer. It might be Tierra.
Anyone else whose name I didn't call? And I see some of you brought those confirmation sheets. If I have your name on my list, then we don't need that sheet. You can just put it in the first trash can you get to, or whatever. So appreciate you bringing it. Does everyone have an agenda? Anyone else? Does everyone have a 2008 super paved manual? Make sure the one you have is a 2008 version. This is the latest thing out. Has all the latest project specifications covered in the manual and so on. And that's what we'll be using for our class here today. This is your manual to keep, as always. Put your name on it, keep up with it, and so on. There's also one that's your supplier. Please keep up with it. Do the ground rules for the class, as always.
Do you have a manual here?
Yes, sir. Bring him one if you will. Anybody else that doesn't have a 2008, that's what you need to have a 2008 version. As always, our classes here are informal. We do have an agenda that we're going to briefly review here in just a minute. Items that we want to cover and emphasize. Obviously, we don't have time to cover every little detail that deals with roadway problems and situations and so on. But what we'll be covering is some what we call instances areas where there's been some changes made in the procedures or the specifications, or problem areas that we see throughout the state and so on. But again, even though your particular question or problem may not be on that agenda, if you have a question, don't hesitate, regardless of what it's about, don't hesitate to bring it up. That's what we're here. I won't guarantee you an answer today, but we'll certainly start looking at that. There's no smoking is allowed inside the building. You can go outside, smoke all you want to. Restrooms, the ladies' room is right outside this door down a way just a little bit. The closest men's room I'm aware of is back, not all the way into the lobby, but turn left at the first chance to get down close to where the restroom is, right across the door from the restroom. Park any place you want to. Definitely go to find a parking place earlier this morning, but I think a lot of those people have left. That shouldn't be a problem. We will be taking breaks from time to time. Back in the back, we have some coffee and some Danish water. At this point, this afternoon, we'll have some drinks and cookies or whatever. But help yourself to that at any time you want to. On cell phones, I would ask that if you have one that you either cut it off or put it on vibrate. Somewhat disturbing when it goes off during the class, but if you do get a call, we realize that you got to respond when the boss or the spouse or whoever calls. So just quietly get up and go outside and talk all you. But we would ask that you put it on the vibrate or cut it off. As I mentioned, we do have an agenda. Here in just a minute, we're going to do just a little bit of review on the super paved mix type, what the designations mean, just to be sure everybody understands what they mean and things you need to be aware of when you put down certain types of mix. After that, we'll do what we call the basic roadway calculations. By now, you know that a lot of the roadway, in fact, most of the roadway calculations involve calculating an area, the rate problems, tons problems, number of gallons required, you know, all those different calculations in most cases involve computing an area that you covered up with whatever, or if you plan to cover with some material that's up to the rate and so on. So we want to make sure that everybody understands how to compute area. After that, we'll be talking about prime and tack codes, some of the problems that we've seen, some of the things you need to be aware of and look for and check on. After that, we'll be talking about placing operations, excuse me, a brief review of the specifications on spreading and finishing and other subjects as well in this topic. We'll be doing something similar as it relates to compaction operations. After lunch, we'll get into inspection and testing with some general topics, technicians' responsibilities, both QC and QA. We'll be talking about segregation. Segregation, I would say, and especially so this end of load segregation that we see, is a major problem, not only in North Carolina, I would say, but throughout the country. It's one of the major causes of early distress and fade of paper. So there's some things that we can do to help to minimize that. We want to talk about those in some detail. Rate of spread, tonnage calculations. These are just where we do some example work problems. And I did mention we'll be doing some up here under prime and tack codes as well. But here we'll be computing the rates. You know, the rates that are specified on the temples and that we're supposed to adhere to. Also, we'll be calculating the tonnage required to cover a given area in certain situations and this type of thing. After that, we'll be talking about paper smoothness. The final surface testing provisions will be covered in detail, the Hearn straight edge provision. I might just say paper smoothness is very important on any paper for several reasons. Paper just demands that we have smooth paper because they ride better, they're cheaper to ride on, less wear and tear on the automobile or vehicle. Actually, the use requires less fuel. And smooth papers are a good indicator of good high quality paper. Just smooth, normally it's going to be uniform. It'll be uniform in surface texture, uniform in gradation, very little if any segregation, and so on and so on. So it's a good indicator of quality, as well as, you know, pleasing to ride. With density, again, very important to achieve density on the paper. If you don't get the proper compaction and density, then you help how to develop the strength of that paper. Just that it won't be as strong as it's intended to be. Very important, as well as, you know, controlling the void content to minimize moisture penetration and accumulation in the paper. Next is records and reports, and we don't go into a lot of detail in records and reports here in the class. You should by now at least have been exposed to most of those that roadway technicians deal with, and so on. But if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to bring them up about any of the records and reports. A couple of comments about records and reports. The boss is instructed us to be sure that we did this. It's very important to keep accurate records and reports for a number of reasons. They document the quality of the work, in some cases the lack of quality. It's just a record of what went on the project. They recorded test results on various things and so on. And so it's very important to keep accurate records and reports. There are some state and federal laws that pertain to falsification and this type of stuff involving records and reports or any other kind of documentation that is involved in that project. This is basically the state law. It was modified several years ago. Initially, it just addressed a person who actually falsified the record or report, document, or whatever. But now it addresses anyone that's involved in that. For example, if your superior instructs or directs or coerces or whatever used to falsify the record, then he is just as guilty, and in my opinion, probably more so than the person who actually does the falsification. But it now addresses anybody that's involved in that process. And I know you probably can't read it here. It says, shall be guilty of a Class H felony. And I'm not sure what the difference between a Class A or a Class H or whatever is, but I do know that when it says felony, that's pretty serious. So just keep that in mind. In similar fashion, there's federal laws and regulations that pertain to the same subject. This is a copy of a notice that is to be placed in all QC labs and all QA labs, as well as I think is also posted on the so-called bulletin board on federal aid projects. It's supposed to be located on or near the project. But it's supposed to be posted in all QA and QC labs. Its basis outlines the federal regulations in similar fashion what the state law does. You can't read it here, but it says right here, shall be fined not more than $10,000 or in prison not more than 5 years or both. So again, that's pretty serious. Down at the bottom there are a couple of names. One is the chief engineer for DOT. The other one is the so-called division engineer for the Federal Highway Administration in North Carolina. But if you have any knowledge or have been directed or instructed or coerced or intimidated or whatever to do any falsification of records, or you know of any fraudulent activity going on the project, whether you were DOT or the contractor, you can contact either one of these persons anonymously if that's the way you want it, and without any fear of repercussions, and report anything or any information that you might have. They also have a hotline number and an email address that you can call. You know, again, if you want to report any kind of activity, you can either call this 1-800 number or use this email address to report any activity of that type. Bottom line here is DOT, NCDOT, and the Federal Highway Administration take this matter very, very, very seriously. There have been some number of people and a number of companies that have been fined pretty severely, and so on, due to some activities like this. Again, the bottom line is, do not falsify the record. Any questions or comments about it? Or anybody want to report anybody just kidding. One thing I did forget, I think it's probably of interest to you. Tomorrow we'll have the test. We'll start at 8:30. I don't know if you've heard it or not, but we changed the rules this year. Whereas in the past the test has been open book, we're not allowing that anymore. So just keep that in mind. You will need a calculator. And you'll probably need a calculator here today. By the way, on the book, my open book, I'm just kidding.
Should have left it a little while longer.
I did that here some time ago. Now, let's see what's back. I thought it would be that hard. And I would not say but it will be open book. You know, you can use anything that's in materials you have. I don't think you really need a spec book. But we always say that you can use any material you have except the person sitting beside you. hopefully we'll have another room, so we'll have more room to work on tomorrow's test. But you will need a calculator, and you'll need one here later, in just a few minutes. Trying to think what I'm doing. As we go along here, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be doing some work problems from time to time, and you can pretty well believe that if we do one here in the class, there's going to be something similar to that on the test tomorrow. Just keep that in mind. But on the exam here, we've allotted 3.5 hours, I believe. Passing grade is 80. I don't remember. I think it was like 70 one-point questions, thereabout. There'll be either multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank, this type of thing. And then there'll be about 30-some points that are problems, the work problems that you have to deal with. Any questions at this point? I have one. How many people are here for initial certification? You've never been Roadway certified before? About a third. So I assume the rest of you are here for recertification. Is that correct? And so a lot of you have already heard this probably either in previous Roadway certification classes or in the introductory classes. I think it does help us to do a little bit of review. One of the things that came out of SuperPay when it was being developed here going on 12 or so years ago now was the use of different binder grades in our mixer. When I say different binder grades, if you'll flip there to page 2-11 in the manual, this is just a listing of the actual grades of SuperPay binder that are available somewhere. And the way that you select the grade that you're going to be using in the SuperPay design process is you first select it based on temperature. There's a high and low temperature that the pavement is going to be performing under. And for example, a typical grade, common grade is used as PG64 minus 22. It's not dash 22, it's minus 22. What do these numbers mean? Obviously, PG stands for performance grade. And what that means is that you want to select that grade based on the intended performance and conditions that asphalt pavement is going to be exposed to. The first number is 64, and that's in degrees Celsius. And it's when you look at North Carolina, when you look at average 7-day maximum temperatures, and this goes back for many, many years. The average 7-day maximum temperature the pavement in North Carolina would be exposed to is over about 64 degrees Celsius. If you're not metrically inclined, that's about 147 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can go out this time of the year, a little later on maybe, yes, before last would be a good time to check. And measure temperature of pavement, and they'll, after several days of warm weather, they'll get up there 140 to 50 degrees in the surface. And so why are we interested in what that high temperature is going to be? Because that's when a pavement gets hot, that's when it's most susceptible to rust. So that first number, the high temperature number, is intended to address rutting. If you look at that table there, it starts, I don't remember the numbers, up there on the left-hand side, it's 46 degrees, and goes down through 84, 82. And what that means is the higher that number is, the stiffer that asphalt will be. It will be able to provide adequate rutting at each, at that temperature. So the higher that number is, the stiffer that asphalt will be. So the first number is intended to address rutting. The second number is the average 7 days, doesn't say average 7, but it's the average 7 days low temperature that pavement is going to be exposed to. Again, when you look at North Carolina in general, minus 22 degrees or minus 8 degrees is about the lowest temperature that we experience here in North Carolina. Now, there are exceptions in both cases. On the low end of the scale, up in the higher elevations in the mountains, we do have temperatures that get lower than that on that. Likewise, on the other end of the scale, down in the southeastern corner of the state, down in Fayetteville, Fort Bragg, Sanford, down in that area, it does get higher than 64 degrees on that. In general, when you look at North Carolina, PG 64 minus 22 will suffice for most of the state based on high and low temperature. And so we call PG 64 minus 22 our standard grade. Now, and if you will just keep that in mind, when we look at the MixTypes here in just a minute, we'll use some of this information. And when I say rutting, rutting that we're talking about in the asphalt tables here, these asphalt grades are just addressed, is not this type of rutting where the subgrade deforms and then the surface eventually falls, it's going to fall, and so you get rutting in the fill path. This is not really, rutting in the pavement, obviously, but it's not due to the pavement strength itself. The type of rutting that we're talking about is what you see down in the lower drawing, where the subgrade is adequate such that it doesn't deflect, but the pavement is not stiff enough or rut resistant enough, such that when a lot of traffic loads, especially heavy, slow moving loads, require this condition occurs. This is the typical rutting that we're talking about. If it doesn't deflect down here, and you get rutting in the pavement, it's when you're going to have a depression there, and that asphalt's going to go somewhere, so it pushes up, and even on both sides, that just compounds the effect of the rut. But this is the type of rutting that super pave was intended to address, primarily. Also, and this is, I believe this is on page 3-1 in the manual, just want to refresh your memory on what this drawing means. This is the high load being applied to the pavement, and that's where the stress is concentrated in the load is concentrated in the smallest areas, so that's where the stress is going to be the greatest. And then as the load is distributed down to the subgrade, it tends to spread out over a larger area, and the idea there is to get it spread out enough to the point that the stress is reduced such that the subgrade can carry that load. I think you can see it, the red can see it, the tile running directly on the subgrade, you wouldn't do very many passes before the subgrade would be so distorted that there'll be basically passes. So the idea there is to get enough pavement thickness so that that load is spread out. And I think you can see here that those surface layers from a rut resistance standpoint need to be probably more rut resistant than the lower layer, because the stresses are the greatest in that surface, and so that's where your most rut resistance needs to be. I guess everybody got the name on the slide.
But it's not on here.
Also, on the next page, you see another drawing of the load being applied to. pavement, and when that happens, there's some deflection occurs. Even concrete pavement deflects slightly. Hopefully this is exaggerated for illustrative purposes, but what happens when the pavement deflects, it puts the bottom part of the layer in tension and the upper part in compression directly under the wheel layer. Then because the curvature is in the opposite direction now on either side, the opposite occurs. So that pavement is constantly bending. It's sort of like a piece of wire or a piece of metal. As long as you don't bend it very much, there's many cycles before it starts breaking and cracking. But if you want to break it and crack it in a hurry, bend it a whole lot, significantly reduces the number of cycles that it will withstand before it starts cracking and breaking. And basically that's the same principle that happens in a pavement. The idea is to build that pavement structure thick enough and strong enough such that it minimizes the amount of deflection. Therefore we can carry a lot more load vehicle past it. But at the same time, I guess you could make it thick enough such that you would have virtually no deflection or very little, if any, so that would make it last a long time. But what else would it also do? It'd be very expensive. So you have to always consider economics when you're designing a pavement. On the next page, this is page 3-3, I believe. Down at the bottom there is a list of criteria for the various super paved mix types. You have to excuse me, I've had this terrible cough. But these are the mixed type designations that we use here in North Carolina. If you work in other states, they may have something different. Pretty sure they probably do. But this is the way we designate them here in North Carolina. It'll be a letter. In one case, it's 2 letters. But it'll normally be a letter followed by a number followed by another letter. Now that first letter, it tells you whether it's a surface mix, an intermediate mix, or base mix. Related to this column. The letter, the number, is a number in millimeters that is related to the what is called a nominal maximum aggregate size in that mix. Why it's like that, I'm not sure, but that's the way it says that. But it's related to the largest size aggregate that's in that mix. If you're not metrically inclined, 9.5 millimeters, for example, is about 3/8 of an inch. That's normal. When you say that, you're normally talking about like 78 inch as being the largest size. On the 12.5 millimeter mixes, they will have some probably 67 stone. Not a lot, but some. 12.5 millimeters is about half an inch. 19 millimeters, about 3/4 of an inch, and it'll normally have a lot of, more 67, maybe even some 57 stone. And then 19 millimeters is about 3/4 of an inch. Then the B25 mixes are, those are your base, asphalt base mixes, they'll have even larger size stone. And so that number is related to the largest size aggregate in the mix. Now the last letter is related to the traffic, projected anticipated traffic that's going to be used in that pavement over its lifetime. Design like that. And it's related to this column right here, what is called the ESAL range. ESAL, or ESAL, stands for equivalent single axle loads. And I don't know all the background of here, but it's somehow related to 18,000 pound axle loads. That's a typical axle load on a big, large truck. And so, but it's a number that these pavement designers use when they're converting the traffic information, not only the total number of vehicles, but the The main thing is the percentage of trucks, various sizes of truck, that really cause this number to go up. And so on. But those letters in that MixType are based on that traffic. Is either an A, B, C, or a D. A is the lowest level of traffic. That would cover most of our low volume secondary 2-lane roads. B level means you have a little more traffic and more trucks. Primarily would be the primary system or the low volume primaries. C level would get into the high volume primaries and maybe some of the rural interstate type routes. And then the D level is the highest traffic level. Your major interstates, fall into that category. I'm not sure what I-40 is right out here. I'm trying to think where I'm at. Probably on the order of 40 or 50 million east. When they get down to the Charlotte area, we have just a tremendous amount of trucks. It's probably in the 100 million east or plus. Now, I don't know any of those numbers, but it's significantly different. But that's what the letter is. And while we're at it, before I forget it, the S4.75 and SF9.5A mixes were added here several years ago. The S4.75, if you've been around a while, you might remember the old sand asphalt mixes that we had. I don't see many people here other than myself that are old enough to remember. And then the SF is basically a fine version of a typical 9.5 mix. And when you look at the gradation of that SF mix, it's basically the very same as it was for I-2, the old I-2 mixes that we use. It's just been a common mix that's been used for many, many years to do 1-inch resurfacing on projects. So it's a fine version of a 9.5. Now we want to talk about the binder grade that we use in various mixes. These have been using that procedure that I mentioned earlier about looking at the temperatures. We came up with PG64 -22 as our standard grade. And then the SuperPave design guidelines say that once you selected the grade based on temperatures, then you want to look at the loading that's going to be used in that pipe. And the reason there is because you're concerned about rutting. And obviously, the heavier the loads are that's going to be used in the pavement, the more susceptible, more likely it's going to rut. So what we want to do there is, if you remember, that first number in that PG grading is intended to address rutting. So in some cases, if we have enough traffic, we may want to go to a stiffer grade or a higher grade of asphalt to address that heavier load. And that's what we do when we get down here to our C and D mix. Again, you're most concerned about rutting in the surface layers. So here on the A and B level mixes, we use the PG64. When we get to the heavier loading on the C mix, we use the PG70. When we get to the D level, we use the PG76. Those are stiffer asphalts and are intended to address that heavier load. Now, what happens is that, say for example, up here on a C mix, surface C mix, we get down to intermediate C mix, whereas if here we bumped up to a 70 on the surface, we didn't bump it on the intermediate. On the D level surface mix, we use a PG76. On the D level intermediate, we only use a PG7. And then when we get down to the base mix, so regardless of the traffic level, we stay with PG64. Why is that? The question quite often comes up when you bumped it up here, but you didn't bump it down here. Well, you bumped 2 grades here, but you only bumped 1 here. Yes, there's 2 or 3 reasons, I guess. One of them is, if you think about it, remember that loading diagram? The surface layers are the layers that are most susceptible to rutting. And then as you come down and get deeper into your pavement structure, that load is beginning to spread out, so the stresses are not as great, and so the mix is not subjected to those heavier, higher stresses, and so it's not as likely to rut. So you don't need that stiffer asphalt. In fact, it'll make it probably less flexible, maybe more susceptible to cracking, so that might be another reason. Also, it's because those intermediate and base layers are lower down in the pavement structure, they don't get as hot. And that's, of course, that's where pavements are, they're hot, it's when they're most susceptible to rut. Pavements do not rut because of the stiffness of the asphalt. They do not rut in the wintertime. Very little. If it's rutting in the wintertime, there's something wrong other than the pavement. I mean, the pavement structure, pavement itself. But the rutting occurs in hot weather. Another reason is probably cost. I guess that's a major reason. Let me assure you that today PG64 is the highest it's ever been. In my field, even adjusted for inflation, it's a lot higher than it's ever been. And appears to be probably going higher. FOB price on PG64 asphalt last month was $544 a ton. 2 years ago, half. So cost is PG70. I don't know the exact number, but PG70 is probably $30 or $40 a ton. And that's primarily due to availability, storage, hauling, handling, and this kind of thing. But when you get to a PG76, very high performance asphalt, no question about it. Very expensive. It may be 2 to 4 times as much as PG64. It's polymer modified asphalt, again, very high performance, very rut resistant, and so very expensive. That's the basic background on how our grades or mix types are designated, what they mean, and so on. The one thing here I want to point out to you as a roadway person is that you have to keep in mind, be aware of what grade you're putting, what mix type you're putting down. Because when you go to these stiffer asphalts, you're going to have to change your way of doing things, so to speak. You'll have to mix them at higher temperatures, and we'll account for that on the job form. We'll be looking at that a little bit later on this afternoon. You have to, when you're placing it, you have to take that into consideration. These stiffer asphalts have to be at higher temperatures, packed in the same way. If you've ever dealt with any PG76 mixes, you better have your act together, so to speak, when you start putting it down. If you're not careful, you won't even get it out of the truck. So they're just different animals, so to speak. You have to take all that into consideration. Work with them differently, make sure that you load them at the proper time, and so on and so forth. Any questions at this point?
Just one.
Yes, sir.
When you go from an A mix to a D mix, it's been explained to me as increased asphalt content as far as your binding.
From A to a D?
A to a D, the asphalt content is
probably the
increased.
opposite.
That's what I thought.
And that, you bring up a good point here. There's been a lot of misunderstanding, confusion, whatever, about what grade do I select. Say, for example, on surface mix. If my situation out there calls for an A mix and it's a light traffic road, probably not the best of subgrade materials under it, and so on, but it calls for an A mix, use an A. Don't say if an A is good, and a B is going to be better, and maybe a C even better. That is not true. In fact, the opposite is probably true. If your particular situation calls for an A mix and you use a B or a C, that pavement is probably not going to last as long. So as you go to the higher traffic level mixes, those mixes are more rut resistant, but they're also stiffer and less flexible. They're designed, and the assumption is made that the subgrade under them is going to be able to support that load And so if you put a real stiff mix on the four subgrade material where it's going to reflect a lot, and that mix just simply will not last as long as, you know, in this case, it's needed. That's just a common misconception that's been around for a while, so not just contractors, but especially DOT people. They're normally the ones that are specifying what mix type. Please keep that in mind. If an A is what it takes, a B is not the. Any other questions? If not, with that, I'll turn it over to Wayne.
Good morning. As you see on the agenda, I'm going to cover with you a little math review to begin with, and then we're going to cover prime coats and tack coats. The review at the beginning is not in your manual. No need to try to find it in there. This is just a very basic review of some of the basic calculations involved in your roadway calculations. We're going to review such things as calculating areas, determining lengths, converting weights, those basic type things. And then as we get on into today, well, at the end of my prime and tack, we'll review some of it in some real regular calculations. We use it throughout the rest of the day. And then after we do that, I will cover prime and tack coat operations. I go through this very quickly. If you got any questions, stop me. If not, I just keep going. Basic shapes that you will deal with on the roadway normally be one of two types. For the most part, it will either be square or rectangle. Most times it will be rectangular shapes. You're going to have some width of roadway that you're dealing with. The length usually is longer than it is wide, so you've got a rectangle in most cases. But in either case, how do you figure the area of a square or rectangle? Length times width. It is, the area is the length times width. If it's a square, you just happen to be squaring the number. Here's a very basic example of a calculation for a rectangle. We have a 3 by 4 rectangular shape. 3 times 4 is 12, and as you can see in the sketch, there are 12 square feet in that area. Any questions? Length times width. Another shape that you'll deal with some, not as often, but some will be triangular shapes. Where you deal with triangular shapes? Taper, typically where you have a tapered area going from nothing to some width, or vice versa, from some width down to nothing, forms a triangle. You have to calculate the area of that. How do you calculate the area of a triangle? 1/2, whatever it was for a square rectangle, which was the length times the width. A lot of folks use base times height on triangles. But as you can see there, if you draw a line from one corner of either a square or a rectangle to the opposing corner, it cuts the figure in half. So formula is 1/2 of what it was for square or rectangle, which was the length times the width. Same numbers I used before, 3 by 4, which was my rectangular shape, was 12 square feet. Now I have a triangular shape that's 3 by 4, and it's 6 square feet. 3 times 4 is 6, divided by 2 is 12. Any questions? Word of caution there, it's real easy to forget to divide by 2. I have a lot of trouble with it myself. Just keep that in mind. Real easy to forget to divide by 2 after you make your multiplication. In my examples, when I multiply feet times feet, I get a unit of what? Square feet. What are most of all of our rates in? Square yards. How do we convert square feet to square yards? Divide by 9. As you see, 1 square yard has 9 square feet in it. 3 times 3 is 9 forms a square yard. So as you know the number of square feet you have, you simply divide by 9 to get your square yard. Any questions? A quick review of determining lengths. In my example so far, I was just giving you the lengths that were involved. How do we determine our lengths on our roadway project? We station the project, and from those stations we determine the lengths involved. Quick review of stationing. One station is equal to 100 feet. I guess Jim told you that we deal with English only in our classes, not metric. So one station is equal to 100 feet. You designate a station as 1 plus 0, which is equal to the 100 feet. To determine distances between stations, you simply subtract and drop the plus sign. You can drop the plus before or after, it really makes no difference. Before you subtract or after you subtract, you get the same results. Here, in my example, from 26 plus 0 back to 21, was 5 plus 0, 5 plus 0, 0. I dropped the plus, and it's 500 feet. My other example, it came out to be 58 plus 98. I dropped the plus, and it's 5,898 feet. Any questions? Subtract, drop the plus sign. A lot of times when you're dealing with shapes and areas on the roadway, you have more than one you're dealing with at a time. A lot of times you tack or prime or cover maybe a regular width of roadway, and maybe some taper and crossovers and stuff like that involved that you're doing at the same time. Generally, we recommend that you divide those areas into different shapes as best you can, and figure each one of them individually, and then add them back together. Here's an example of where we had a section of roadway with a taper coming off of it. I divided it into two shapes, area 1 for the rectangular shape of roadway, and number 2 for the tapered area. And I calculated them. The first one was 10 feet wide by 180 feet long. Divided by 9 is 200 square yards. And then I had area 2, which was 90 feet by 4, divided by 2, then divided by 9 for 20 square yards, and I totaled it up to be 220 square yards. Any questions? And we realize, that we're making the assumptions that your lines are straight when you make the calculations. Naturally, we have to do that in class, and you do that as well out there on the roadway. Sometimes, granted, they're not as straight as we would like to have them, but you have to assume that they're straight in making your calculations. With that, let's do a calculation. Get your calculators out. If you don't have calculators, you're going to need them. The rest of the day we'll do several calculations, so if you don't happen to have one, you need to get it at break. I'm going to give you a sketch here and ask you to figure the total square yardage in this sketch. If you can't see it at the rear, I'll read the station numbers out. Beginning station is 25 plus 20. The ending station is 68 plus 05. The roadway is 14 feet wide. And then there's a taper at the end that begins at 65 plus 05. Total square yardage in that sketch. Anyone have an answer they'd like to share with us? 68, 15, 55. For the time being, don't worry about your decimal. We're going to go over significant decimals when I finish the review here. Whatever you figure to, if it's right, fine. Whatever. 68, 15, I heard something, 58, 68, 15. 68, 15. I figured mine to the 10th, and I got 68, 15.6. First area there was 4,285 feet in length, about 14 feet wide, divided by 9, 66, 65.6. And the triangle area was 300 feet long times 9, divided by 2, then divided by 9, for 150 for 68, 15.6. I'll leave that up there a second, and then I'll get a look at it. What we've covered so far is very basic calculations of figuring areas, pretty simple numbers. One thing you need to realize, though, that it's very important to get your area correct. If you get your area incorrect, what else are you going to get incorrect? The answer you're really working for, whatever it is, the rate for whatever you're trying to figure is going to be, well, unless you magically screw up the same way twice somehow, it's going to be wrong. Maybe more importantly here in our class, and more importantly on the exam tomorrow morning, sometimes we'll have a sketch that you're asked 2 or 3 questions about. So it makes it even more important, to get that area correct. It's a little hard to look at your answer and decide if it's a realistic answer or not. The best advice I can probably give you is look at your rate. I mean, generally about what your rate should be. I mean, sort of on the ballpark. If that rate looks sort of unusual for any reason, first place I go back to is I recalculate that area again, just to be sure that that's not what caused that rate number to look wrong. Any questions? Last thing we're going to review is conversion of weights. We deal with weights on the roadway in the form of tons and pounds. We're going to review converting tons to pounds and vice versa. 1 ton, 1 English ton is 2,000 pounds. If we're converting pounds to tons, we take the number of pounds and divide it by 2,000. In my example, I had 25,000 pounds divided by 2,000 is 12.5 tons, 12.5 tons. The opposite, where I'm converting tons to pounds, I take the number of tons and multiply it times 2,000. Here I have 15.6 times 2,000 is 31,200 pounds. Any questions? Which conversion will you most often be doing on the roadway? Your asphalt comes to you in tons, your rate's in pounds, you're going to be doing the latter. You're going to be converting your tons to pounds. Most of the cases, you're going to be multiplying times 2,000. And a word of caution there, when you do that, you can in fact get a large number, and it can be a correct number. When you multiply 2,000, it can give you a pretty big number. And the reason we mention this is we see it all the time. We see folks that do that, and they get the right answer, and for some reason, they think the number looks too big, and they just move their decimal over on it. So just realize you can get a big number in that case. Any questions? As I said, we've reviewed significant decimals at the end of what we're going to do now. This is in your manual. It's on page 9-55. If you'll turn over to that, we'll review our significant decimals for roadway calculations. These are our significant decimals for our different roadway calculations. I'm not going to go over the significant decimals in any detail at all. You can see what they are as easy as I can read them out to you. It's not so important here in class or on our exam as far as that goes, because all of the work problems we actually do, we're going to tell you the significant decimal figure to. If it's a blank here, it's going to say figures in years old or years 10, whatever it is. So you shouldn't have a problem here. But this is a good reference sheet sheet, when you get back out there, if you can't remember, this is the page you need to go to, 9-55. I will quickly review the rounding procedure. We have a rounding procedure, so everyone does it the same. I would say that as far as I can recall, this has been the NCDOT's procedure for as long as I've been with the state. So we've used this same process for a long time. Basically, it says that when the digit to be dropped is one beyond the significant decimal, is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you leave that digit the same as it is, and you drop all the numbers. You leave the significant decimal the same, and you drop all the numbers past it. If that digit 1 beyond the significant is 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, then you round the significant decimal up 1 and drop all those numbers past it. Any questions? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, you leave it the same. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you round it up. You only have to look at one number when you're rounding. See a lot of folks that like to over-round. You don't have to look at the number to the right of the significant decimal. Whatever that number is, that's the one that determines what your significant decimal is. If that number to the right of it is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you drop all those numbers past the significant. It's 0, 1, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you round it up. Any questions? With that, turn back to the beginning of section 9. Go ahead and get the computer up here. If you give me just a second. We're going to cover prime and tack code operations next. Notice we skipped from early on in the manual all the way over to section 9. Reason being, Jim covered a few things with you there in the beginning, a few sections in the way of reviewing MixTypes and design. From there until section 9, everything in between is plant related. Of course, we don't cover any plant related material in this class basically, so we skip over to section 9. Sections 9 and 10 in your manual are the two basic roadway sections. This is where most all of your roadway information is contained. So we'll be in 9 and 10 the remainder of the day. A little bit of 11 as we finish up today on records and reports.
Please start from over. Here over for some reason.
Eventually, it's gonna go the other way.
Take about a 10-minute break.
Okay, keep it on whenever I'm.
Yeah, it's a good idea, because sometimes I get out of truck with it off. Like I said, I'm not the only one runs the
So I guess we don't need all this running around.